Anita is a courageous mama, and she is a survivor. And I'm looking forward, kind of a sad way, but I'm looking forward to our conversation today, Anita, because I think that there's so much that needs to be discussed, so much truth
Yeah.
that needs to be told. And that's really why we are here. So if you are watching and you're intrigued by the caption on this, I want to invite you to hit share. Definitely be active with your reactions and your likes or shocked faces. There might be a lot of shocked faces on this story. That's okay if there is. But definitely interact, because this is one of the Facebook videos that I'm really hoping will be seen by many people. We're going to raise some questions today that desperately need to be answered. So Anita, do you want to tell everybody how we met, or do you want me to?
Let's say you came at one of the hardest times into my life and made a very big difference in my life and in my battle, but I'll leave it to you to actually tell the story.
Well, you know, I think that there were actually a number of people, mutual people, that brought us to be introduced to each other. I know that we have had several mutual friends, and some of them knew you before I did. And ultimately, in the work that we do with WILD, that my team does, we have a number of support groups for women who are in different types of crisis or trauma or recovery. And that's where we got to know each other. And I did ask Anita's permission to say that. So we got to know each other in WILD's support group. And we have several. And in that, we have had the opportunity of walking alongside Anita for a couple of years now. Anita, can you give us a brief overview? I know that there are years of what you have been through, and we could be here for a long time with all the details, but can you give us a summary, a brief overview of what you have been through, what happened to you?
How brief?
Well, I have a feeling
I can say
you unpacking it.
Hell under the cover of grace, and that would be in one sentence. In one sentence, everything. Like, that's as brief as it gets.
Wow. Okay, so share us that one sentence, and then we'll go back and we'll pull more out of it. How's that?
Okay. Well, hell under the cover of grace is basically 8 years of my life. I met my ex-husband. Like, I grew up as in a pastoral family, in a Christian family, and I was blessed with a wonderful family. Mm-hmm. And, you know, that's the way I looked at family, at finding your future spouse, at pastors in general. Mm-hmm. So when I met my now ex-husband, it was because of a mission trip. I wanted to go. He was organizing it. It was like the perfect fit. I never went in the end, though, because I was still a minor. And we start chatting, and we talked a lot. And after a couple of years, you know, it grew into something more. And I mean, what else? A lot of people ask me, like, why did you get married to someone from Europe to South America that you only saw twice? First of all, I was barely 20. So I don't want to judge myself back then. I would give myself a hug back then, or a heads up. There were a lot of red flags, but back then I didn't see them. I saw that he prayed with me every day. I saw that, you know, he read the Bible with me every day. Oh, he was a theology student. So, like, I looked at my father, and it's like, I mean, that cannot be a bad guy. Like, there's no chance that it's going to be a bad guy. But then our first wedding night happened, which was, I mean, there's one word for it, which is traumatic. I won't go into the details. And, you know, he believed the problems in me, in my head. I Googled it. And you should not Google that stuff. It will just mess up even more things. Anyways, we moved to Peru, and that's where like the isolation happened. I did not know the language, and I think he kind of liked that because I was depending on him 100%. Even some English speaking friends, like I could have friends, but not get too close to anybody, not talk about our personal life with anybody. And I think you can't really pinpoint where the abuse started, because I got a lot of questions of where did the abuse start. I would say like, imagine, here's a pen. Imagine this is me, and that's my boundary. And then the person steps a little bit over it, like just a teeny tiny bit over it. And then if you react, it's like, why are you reacting? Like, why are you making a big deal? It's just, it's nothing serious happened. And then you go, okay, maybe he's right. And then now your boundary is here. And then again, he steps through it. And then it goes like that until you have no boundaries. You don't have yourself. You become like basically a puppet. Yeah. Like you have to be the way, you have to think the way, you have to act the way. And if you don't, then, it's a problem. And then it's your fault. And like the worst part of the abuse was the sexual abuse. And oh, my hand is shaking as I'm talking about this. Honestly, it took years of therapy to be able to say, I was raped, and that's not okay. And like, if I could go back to that Anita 12 years ago, I would like give her a really, really tight hug and tell her that it's not her fault. And if like anybody listening ever went through something similar, like just give yourself a really tight hug and tell yourself that it's not your fault. It's never your fault.
Or don't berate yourself for what you didn't know to look for. So just to recap, you were super young, and of course in a lot of faith communities you're encouraged to marry young. You're encouraged to marry the guy who prays and who does the mission work and who is the theology student, because this is the perfect, the cookie cutter. This is the identity. You want to be a minister's wife.
If he loves God, if he has God in the first place, then everything else will fall into line.
Right. And so,
but it didn't.
And then it doesn't. And I would actually venture to say that the abuse began before you were married, because abuse is not only a situation where someone is hurting you. Abuse is also the situation where someone is nice to you so that you don't leave when they do hurt you. When there is an abusive system in a relationship, and I know you know this, but just for those who are watching who may be kind of new to this, anytime that someone is using their power and privilege to exploit, to coerce, to control the person who has lesser power and privilege for their harm, that is an abusive situation. And sometimes that includes seasons of being very nice.
Love bombing.
Yes, except there's no love, just the bomb crater.
Yeah, but it's covered in the word love.
Right.
So.
Right.
Yeah. So, besides the sexual abuse, like there was a lot of problems with. I mean, it was always put on the Latino culture, but a lot of not just that, but being very, let's say, liking to flirt with people. It was put as, oh, it's normal, late night out alone with other girls or women, actually. Very explicit photos on his computer or phone, inappropriate sexting. And then after a while, when he realized, that I caught up on it, then he would like lock everything down. And he was like, oh, you have to respect my privacy. Like, this is my privacy. You're invading my privacy. You're being jealous. You're being irrational. And when for 8 years you listen that there's a problem in your head. we cannot go to a marriage counselor, because the real problem is that your relationship with God is not close enough. So when you fix your relationship with God, which would be getting up at 5 a.m. in the morning to read the Bible, and I don't know how many of you have little kids or newborns, that's like you sleep when you can and you don't sleep when yeah. That is like, that's not the definition, but for him it was. And he believed, you fix yourself first and then you come to me, because I'm a pastor and I read many books and I fixed so many marriages in the church. So then I will fix us. But we cannot talk about this to anybody outside of a marriage, because, everybody's a backstabber and they're going to use it against us. And we're a pastoral family and we're an example.
In other words, so isolation. And there was deflection. It's all your fault, not his. And there was manipulation. He gets the good stuff.
A lot of
you don't get any of it. There was intimidation. If you talk to anyone, bad things will happen, which goes back to the isolation. Instead of living in love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, gentleness, faithfulness, self-control. And those four things, isolation, deflection, manipulation, and intimidation, are the four tools of abuse in any context. And we're actually going to get into how those apply a little bit later in several other situations. So you went through several years then, starting from the beginning of rape, adultery, pornography addiction with your spouse, isolation, power, coercive control, intimidation, all of these.
Even financial abuse, yeah.
Abuse. There's always financial abuse when you have all of these different things, because it's part of keeping the other person impoverished so that they cannot have the resources to be independent, right? Let's go back. So you went through all of these different forms of abuse, so many of the different 13 types of abuse. And then you got to the point where it was so bad, and the sexual abuse, the financial abuse, the isolation, all of these things were so challenging.
I just wanted out.
That you couldn't take it anymore. You needed, what did you need at that point?
I'm not sure what I needed. I knew I wanted out, and I knew that nobody will believe me, because he was this influencer, a lot of followers online, and it was all about family, marriage, parenting, and like, who would believe me? He's the one that's like a public image. He has this huge public image. People love him, and then who can I turn to? And I knew if whatever I would say, like, he would not allow me to leave. Like, there was no chance. I made the most horrible mistake of my life, which at that point seemed the only way out, and that's mine to deal with, my cross to take. I had an affair and I told him, and I expected now he's gonna leave me. Like, I made the most horrible sin that there is in Christianity. He's just gonna leave me, and I was ready for it. Like, I always say, you cannot justify adultery, and you should never justify it. I do believe I made a very bad choice, but at that point, I felt like there's no other way out, and I was 100% sure he will leave me if I tell him. And that was my way out, because then nobody will try to keep me in the marriage. Nobody will try to make me stay in that marriage, to pray and it will get better and everything. Then it's just out. He gets a clean cut. He leaves me. But he didn't. And the abuse just multiplied, became horrible. And I think it was the worst 6 months of my life. And I got really, really sick. And in the end, my parents helped me to get out. Like, the abuse has its own cycle. And looking back, I can see the cycle, but it took a longer time. When you have the tension and then the abuse and then the honeymoon phase. But that was like, it took a while. So, when you get married, it's for good or bad.
Right.
And then I always thought, this is the bad, and then the good will come, because the honeymoon cycle, part, it always came. And then you just like sit there tight. And if we just sit this out, the honeymoon phase will come. But then after that, I told him, he decided to keep me, and whatever he did, it was justified by, oh, people don't know about this, so this is the least that you can get for what you did, and you have to take this. And then he would go so very far, even with the sexual abuse. I just not going to go into it because they're very explicit details what he did. And every time he would tell me, then those cycles became so close to each other, like sometimes even just a couple of days. And when he went over the top, he would kneel in front of me and cry and ask for forgiveness, and then would have a revelation from God, saying now he's a changed man. After one weekend, he's a changed man. He's going to do things differently. He even promised me, if I do this to you again, I will be the one who will pack up his bags and leave you because you don't deserve this. Nobody deserves this. Just give me one more shot. Then he made up that I was possessed by a demon. And he brought in LNG white writings to prove I'm possessed by a demon. And then he held rituals in our room, in our living room, saying the demon is in that corner. Even our dog sees it. And that's why the dog is barking at. Like, it was like, and you lose it. Like, literally, like, someone's crazy here. It's not me, but he's claiming it's me. And I have no out. I have nowhere to go. He's blocking everything. When he figured out I want to leave, he didn't even let me go alone to the grocery store. Like, it went to that extent because he knew I want to leave. And I can only thank my parents who helped me to escape with my children together.
Now, after this, you'd think, oh, well, yay, she got out, and except it got worse.
Oh, yeah. That's when the flying monkeys come.
Right. So did you report it?
I did report it. First of all, the first person I actually reported to was the union president.
Okay, let me pause 1 second.
Oh, okay.
No, it's fine. I just want to give a little explanation because I know is that my audience comes from many, many different denominational backgrounds, and every denomination is structured just a little bit different. Mm-hmm. And so I just want to give a little insight lesson here, so that for the rest, when we talk about church leadership, that it is very clear who belongs where, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
So whenever I work with people from varying denominations, teaching moment, it's important to understand how different denominations are structured. And I know that our audience, the wild audience, runs in over 45 countries, and we have dozens of different denominational backgrounds and different cultures. So in the understanding of that, the denomination where Anita has, where it goes into the church leadership, is called the Seventh-day Adventist denomination. And they are a global denomination, a global church with 13 world divisions. And in each division, there are different unions, and different unions are divided into different conferences. Each one of these layers, the local church, and then the conference and union division, and then there's the global church headquarters. So it's kind of similar to Wesleyan or even Catholic dioceses, where there's different layers of church organization and administration. And so if she's referring to union or conference, those are the different layers of administration above the local church in this particular denomination. So that gives a little bit of background for some of the information about church leaders at different levels, so that you can just follow along. All right, there's my little verbal infographic, and go ahead.
Thank you.
So, you're welcome. I just want to make sure that everyone who is following along, who doesn't have the same denominational background that you have, is very able to kind of follow the line of sharing. So you reported to the union president, not your local church pastor, because your local church pastor is your husband, right?
The local church pastor was my husband, and when I escaped to the neighbor country where my parents were. And
Okay.
those two countries, they are under the same union because they're small countries. So they belong to the same union. And my ex-husband came to get me when I escaped. He came to get me,
And bring you
and
home.
I didn't want to go back. And he told me, and I think that was my breaking point where I knew I'm never going back. He told me, you tell me that I'm abusing you, but actually you're the one abusing me because I have been without sex for the past week.
We could
And
have
that
a
was
whole
like,
conversation about the fallacy of entitlement to sexual needs, but we will not be having that conversation today.
no. So anyways, the union president came in to, let's say, mediate. He was there. He said he's going to talk to both of us. And
Now,
he
was
spoke
your
to both
father
of us.
president at this time?
Yes, my father was conference
Okay.
president at that time.
So normally you might go to the conference president for this mediation, but since that's your dad, the union president stepped, right? Okay.
Yes. And he questioned me, which was very uncomfortable because I was alone and literally crying in front of a man, talking about sexual abuse and what I went through. And then he spoke to my ex, and he told us that he believes the best thing right now is separation. And they somehow, I mean, my ex left in the end. He left us there. A couple days later, the women's ministry director from the conference where I came from, she wrote to me like, oh, you disappeared. It's irresponsible. You shouldn't have left. There's so much work to do. And I told him, that it's not just that I disappeared. I had to escape, that I've been abused, that I've been raped. And, she wrote back to me like, oh, I don't understand. How can there be rape in marriage? Like I've been married for 38 years and I never said no to my husband. Like no matter if we feel bad or anything, love conquers all. And I was like, okay. And that was a very hard time because accepting the fact that I was actually abused is a very difficult process. And I was in a very bad state and my parents took me. My ex demanded that they take me to a professional, to a psychologist, because I need to understand that I need to get back to him. And they took me to a psychologist. And the psychologist told me, like, you've been abused. And then he was like, oh, no, that's not a Christian psychologist. You got to take her to a Christian psychologist who's pro-family. And then that Christian psychologist also said that she was abused. And he was like, no, no, no. You need to go to a psychologist that I also go to. So that psychologist hears my side of the story, and that will help you to understand that you have to get back to me. And then my parents took me like 2 weeks after I came home. They took me to the social services, and then they reported automatically. They are mandated reporters, and then they reported.
1 second. I live near train tracks. There is nothing I can do except like go live in a bunker, and even then I'd probably still hear the train. I think we're good. Go for it. It happens every time.
David mandated reporters and then reported it to the police, and then that's when he got his first restraining order. And here in my country, those restraining orders, they last 30 days. And they kept telling me that I need to go and ask to extend it. But the church kept telling me like, oh no, there's no need to take this to court. Don't take it to court. Like, we're going to deal with this internally. It's going to be taken. Just don't go to court. There's no need to go to court. And then, months pass by and there's nothing happening. I just get a text from my ex like, oh, I have to start I have to disfellowship you. I'm very sorry. And I'm like, okay, but I want to use my right to talk to the church. He's like, yeah, you can use your right, but yeah, just so you know. But then nothing happened. And they asked me to sign a paper that he's morally, ethically correct, even though we got divorced, and I declined. I told them I can't with a clean conscience. And they said, okay. But then he stayed a pastor. He told me he can't be a pastor without that. But then he continued being a pastor. And then it took me like 8 months, let's say, to like collect my strength.
Did you go to the psychologist he was using? And because it sounded like you went to about 3 psychologists, right? Was it 2 or 3, something like that? And then
Yeah, 3 different ones. He used his friend from Peru as his psychologist, and I didn't want to be evaluated by his friend.
minor conflicts of interest there, just ethically speaking. Professional ethics, that should be precluded.